Slipstream Podcast. We appreciate you listening and downloading wherever you choose to listen to your podcast. The boys were back on the track in Bahrain, and we're back to break down every bit of the opening weekend in the F1 2023 season. We're a man down this week. Brady may or may not be having double wrist surgery, but Sten, Cole, and myself are ready to start where we left off. So let's start where the weekend began. Sten, where do you feel anything that stood out to you in the days leading up to the race on Sunday?
It's interesting that we only had the one preseason testing track as opposed to last year because the new regs we had two. But it was cool seeing the cars kind of take over the next weekend in the same track. And, I think we will probably cover it a lot, but like the Aston Martin hype train, like Aston Martin looked like a clear front runner. And surprisingly too, right? I think surprisingly too, Mercedes really played like they looked like they were going to be on the back foot. And Haas looked pretty competitive. But they're, other than a couple of issues here or there, like through practice and whatnot, I think, just jumping right past most of practice, I think in qualifying, if we just focus on Q1 for a quick second, and I know that some of the leading teams kind of held back some of their performance into Q2 and Q3, but I want to say that was the closest Q1 since the turbo hybrid era. It was 1.2 seconds separating the leading car to the 20th place. Which is really promising. I've probably been a broken record at this point saying eventually the regulations are going to kick in. Eventually you're going to see that kind of like tumbling through and, up and down the order. And it feels like, at least maybe from Copycat or from whatever, you've got some pretty big movement through the grid just on the first weekend. So I'm super excited for this year.
Yeah, I agree, Austin. In qualifying, I think one of the biggest shockers for me was all of our predictions were wrong. Other than Red Bull potentially just going to dominate, everything that I thought was wrong. McLaren looked terrible. Alpine, Pierre did not have a strong showing. K-Mag didn't look great. So all the teams who I thought would be a little higher up, they did not qualify that well, but it was so exciting to see the cars back on the track after waiting. It felt like forever. But yes, the Aston Martin hype train, absolutely real. I'm sure we will get into it a little bit later, but qualifying I thought was obviously super exciting. Real fast, the fact that Logan Sargent out-qualified the other rookies on the grid. Nick DeVries qualified 19, Oscar qualified 18, and Logan qualified 16. The fact that he out-qualified everybody, I feel like I'm blown away by
Jay,
that. I don't think anybody saw that coming. I don't think anybody had a realistic expectation that Williams would be able to put a car in front of McLaren and Alpha Tauri.
Norris.
Sure enough,
so not even
Logan
just
had a hell of a showing.
He happened to tie Lando after Lando had already set the lap down, so he of course got the tiebreaker went to Lando. But yeah, I mean, he looked pretty good in qualifying form. Looking at the other last two people removed in Q1, Gasly, who just never really hooked one up. I think he had a lap deleted, and then K-Mag got impeded on the back end. So again, Haas looked pretty promising in their long runs in practice throughout the weekend, and I kind of went all in on Haas this weekend in fantasy, and it kind of bit me with him qualifying so poorly.
Yeah, I mean, Logan not just out qualifying the rookies, but the only reason he wasn't in Q2 is because his lap didn't go in before Lando. Is pretty incredible. And like American podcast, American driver, like hyping him up. We didn't even expect that. That wasn't a thing that we even thought that was a possibility. So that's really cool to see. Just something from an American standpoint. But also, obviously, from that Q1, the regulations do seem like they're helping. Also, it seems like they're affecting the mid-tier and the lower tier, good or bad, more than it's actually affecting those those top 3 constructors from last season. It's obviously a small sample size, but that seems to be where that more or less wind tunnel time is factoring in, more so than anybody else.
Have you guys seen the difference of the rookies' deltas to the seasoned veterans on their team? Have you looked at it? So I'm trying to navigate right now. So Albon, 31.4, Sargent 31.6, and change 2 tenths.
No,
you've got Lando's first time as a 31.6 to Sargent.
Wow.
To Oscar P, 32.1, half second. And then you have De Vries at a 32.1, and you have Yuki's first at a 31.4, so about 7 tenths. So, I mean, Logan was only 2 tenths off Albon. That's pretty remarkable. I mean, even if you look further up the grid, right, like the difference between, some of the other cars, like the Ocon and Gasly issue. I know there was a lap time deleted, but it was much bigger than that. So pretty promising. It'll be cool to see these lower midfield cars developing around like rookie drivers to see how they perform. But yeah, I think we need to keep an eye out on McLaren because the sirens are going off, and they were last year at the start in Bahrain too. But I mean, we can jump into the race eventually, but McLaren does not look good all weekend.
I mean, what is going on in those weeks leading up to this first race that has just caused them to just throw out complete duds last year? And this year, it wasn't just like the pace of the car. I mean, they couldn't even the reliability was completely out the window as well. It's scary if you were them thinking that you were going to try to compete in their window of competing for a championship. I don't know off the top of my head. Cole, I know you can give that to me. But 2024, you better make some quick changes if you want the same driver lineup in 2024, 2025.
24.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, I want you to think about Daniel Ricciardo just laughing his way to the bank right now. I mean, $18 million this season to not drive that shit box. So poor Oscar.
But
I do think the McLaren will sort it out over time.
Most innovative tech
it's pretty much as bad of a start as you could possibly get. So yeah, I'm a huge red flag for McLaren.
Yeah, Matt, did you see these?
Yeah, where you can like change what it is.
Yeah, so in real time, the advertising panels on, I think it's like the passenger side of the monocar.
The
I don't know if
advertising
it's
panels on the car
out that way can change between their sponsors in real time. Yeah.
Well, we're glad you figured that part out. How about you figure out where you don't have to pit to blow
I think it's
air
both. But you know what?
car.
Fucking cool. Make your car faster. Like cool tech. Great. But
so
like that doesn't make you faster.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Right. Every 5 laps
just to finish through qualifying.
Come on. Sweet signs, though.
We all
awesome.
expected
Pit now should be
based on what we saw Aston to really be competing pretty high up there. And while Alonso did qualify 5th, which is still very impressive, I think the general consensus was that they would be a little bit quicker than the Ferrari in one lap pace, and that didn't happen, at least in the qualifying. But It looked a little concerning for Red Bull in the beginning because they didn't really get a good, lap time down on the first run because there was a red flag. Because I'm sorry, we haven't talked about it yet, but we can for the first time this season. As Leclerc was starting his first lap of the qualifying season, the car started falling apart.
That's just the first of the list of Ferrari fuck ups this week.
We'll cover
number
more.
one, and it's incredible that they had all those issues last year. They're trying to get the car going, and they just it's literally like you're not just saying, like, it is not figuratively falling apart. It is literally falling apart. Pieces are coming off of the car, and it had to be red flagged. It's unbelievable that it's still not fixed for that constructor.
Yes. So we have the car. I guess it's I don't know the right term, but like the fin, right, that goes over the wheel. It connects to the front axle and near the braking system. I guess the part that was attached below the braking system that kind of stabilizes the air or whatever behind the wheel snapped off. So that's what broke. Leclerc then locks up into turn one. He said that he outbraked himself, whatever. But fast forwarding to the last run of Q3 when he is sitting in, I think, second. Yeah, he's in second place at the time. Doesn't even go out for his last run. They saved tires for him for the race because they knew they couldn't get the Red Bull on one lap pace. So he's the only person who didn't go back out to go for a second run on a new set of tires strategically for the start of the race, which did help a little bit. But one, the car's falling apart, and two, this is a weird judgment call before you're even out of qualifying.
Yeah, I understood the call. I'm just not. It obviously didn't execute well in the race with having reliability issues anyway. But it was weird to see him pull in the garage. I think even Crofty was like, "Why is he? Does he have a problem? Is there something
you're
wrong?"
Not going to beat him on one lap pace.
Playing the strategy game, but yeah, again,
you have a better.
If you can't finish the race. It doesn't matter what strategy.
Beating them on a one lap pace just because of somebody screwing up. They obviously knew that they weren't going to outpace them for whatever 50, 60, whatever, however many laps it was. I don't know why you're saving for that. Like, it makes logical sense, theoretical sense. It just doesn't seem to fit. It's just another head scratcher for them.
Yep. And especially with how, the Red Bull looked on long run through practice, like, I think everyone had kind of conceded based on what they were seeing that Red Bull would be ahead. I posted something in our group thread, something to the effect of like Red Bull was expected to be 0.4 a lap faster than Ferrari and like nearly 2 seconds a lap faster than almost everyone else, with Aston kind of being at that like 0.7 second, whatever. So start of the race, right? So Red Bull locked out the front row. You've got Ferrari second row. You've got Fernando split by the Mercedes. In 4, 5, 6, and Checo bogs out bad on the start and gets just swallowed up. Surprisingly, he maintains and holds on to third place, but I think that kind of set his race off, and he was very vocal about it after the race, that kind of ruined his chances of competing for a win because he was stuck behind Leclerc for that entire first stint.
Yeah, Checo didn't have the worst start of anybody. Sometimes you do have to line up correctly. So Esteban, good job on taking the worst start of the season so far. But yeah, it was incredible that he got bogged down. He gets past, and maybe he would have competed, but I mean, Max was just. It was unbelievable at his at that differential after like 2 to 3 laps. I mean, it was already a second and a half, 2 seconds. I mean, over Leclerc, and maybe Checo can keep up with a better pace than that. But it's just, it's incredible. It really is. I don't know how else to phrase it with just what he's able to do in a race car.
Also, early in the race, obviously Checo got eaten up early, and on lap 2, going into turn 1, we knew it was going to happen at some point. It just happened sooner than later. Lance and Fernando come together, and Fernando was asking, "Who hit me? Where'd this come from?" He had lots of questions, and his engineers would not give him a clean answer. And it looked like he figured it out that it was Lance in the post race room watching TV, and he did a good job not making many a face about it. But of course, yeah, Lance and Fernando come together. I don't think either of them got any major damage, but of course, I wanted to talk about Lance real fast before we got into the race. But being able to qualify, I mean, we mentioned before he broke both of his wrists a few weeks before. Felipe Drugovich, he drove the car in practice. And then they decided to put Lance in the car. He couldn't get himself out of the car. His engineers had to pull him out. He couldn't turn the wheel without having to take his hand off the wheel to help push it around. But he did find a way to drive that car. He drove it into Fernando, but he did find a way to drive.
I'm watching the 30-minute replay just because, I figured we'll chat for about 30 minutes.
But yeah, lap 2.
It was lap
Lance,
1,
Fernando,
turn 4. He didn't even make
contact,
it out of an entire sector. So he kind of shot it on the inside of Bottas, kind of cut the apex. And yeah, he clipped him. And Alonso, again, to your point, said that like they are so extremely lucky that didn't cause major issues for the entire team. And again, they wouldn't tell Alonso, right? He kept asking over and over on the radio, like, who hit me? Are you investigating? And they're like, don't worry about it. We'll investigate it after the race.
Good for them. I mean, obviously,
at some point he's just from from his thinking, he's got to realize possibly who it could have been and why they aren't telling him. But part of me was, as cool as it was to see how well they did, how well Alonso did, I was really hoping that he was gonna finish 11th, just because it would have I think the whole weekend was just elation for him, so it just didn't matter. Like if he finishes 11th because of it, because he gets damaged, he's got to pit after lap 1 or whatever it may be. It would have been a fantastic interview or whatever afterwards. But he was happy, so good for him. Not fun for fans. Well, maybe for some, but from a drama standpoint, it would have been fun without him.
From the drama standpoint, what lap did Carlos get called in that he did not come in? Was that Carlos?
Ferrari double stacked on the first stint,
Ferrari
which was actually really impressive.
Pit blunder,
but I'm glad that you brought up Ferrari because
maybe midway through the race.
We mentioned it, but we kind of glanced over it. So Leclerc, right? Car started falling apart, qualifying Q1. The tire situation going on in Q3. They changed the energy store system before the race. So there are a couple parts that can be replaced under Parc Fermé. It looks like Red Bull replaced 2 internal combustion engine intake caps or something, just random miscellaneous parts. And when I read that, I was like, oh, they had issues with fuel, whatever. They're probably just double checking and making sure it's an easy change. But Leclerc ended up eating up one of his 2 available replacement ICE, internal combustion engine storage parts. So that the battery storage, pretty much. So just because he took a new one doesn't mean he can't use the old one. They can be interchangeable. But the stipulation or the speculation, was that the battery has a bunch of different cells in it. If one of them is having an issue, you can replace it with a completely new setup, and then you can come back and repair that cell of the battery, and there's no big deal. So it's not a major issue for the season. But again, so now before the green flag before the lights have gone out, you have 3 weird things that have happened for Ferrari already.
Yeah, and by the time, I think it was, I don't know the exact lap 41 is car failure. So he goes from third to out of the race. Carlos complains about not porpoising, but just bouncing in the car late in the race, and his team doesn't give him any real answers on that.
It already just shows
there's just a lot that Ferrari
really
seems like they're just not
off, and
they're not sorted to give Red Bull a real fight.
Was fixed, and we talk about the car and the car failing and literally falling apart and having to replace parts, and then it having a hydraulic issue or whatever it was. We talked about in the Ferrari thing that there are some things that Leclerc and Sainz cannot control. And it wasn't spins or whatever, but when we were watching it live, Leclerc locked up in turn 1 half a dozen times over the weekend. If you're competing or trying to compete for a championship, and again, it wasn't a spin like he had like last year in some of his races, but you can't continue to make the same mistake over and over and over and over and over. He's super talented, and he has the ability to, at some point, win a world championship. Max may not be in the sport anymore, but that may be when he can win it. You can't continue to bite yourself in your own ass, especially when you're having all these outside problems. If you're having all these problems that you can't control, you better be honed in on your shit better than anybody. And he's not there, which is probably frustrating for him. It's probably frustrating for Ferrari fans, but he's also got to get better at what he can control.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's going to be a long season. Hopefully, they figure out some things and there's new leadership. So I would assume that they're not really too set and ingrained in whatever has happened in the past, but we'll see. Jay, you called out the fake pit. I think that was on Russell, lap 11. So he had kind of pulled the dummy. But right after that, Lewis goes in and then you've got some really, really close racing with Alonso. And I think this is where Alonso really started kind of getting into the groove. So again, we'd said that he started 5th, I think. And he was able to race the top 3 teams, or at least race with some of the top 3 teams. And he made some really great moves and, put the car in a couple places where I don't see very many people looking to do so. He had an overtake over one of the Mercedes going into turn 4 and kind of ate it, stayed with them through turn 7. Later in the race, he ended up I think he took Lewis right on into turn 10. And for anyone who doesn't watch the races as intently and see, the track layout and whatever else, like, turn 10 is a very, very weird, probably one of the most difficult braking points in the calendar. We were talking about it when we were watching it all live together, where it's very, very tight turn, off camber. Most people lock up as they're getting comfortable with it. And just to completely send it on the inside of that turn on a 7-time world champion was unbelievable how quickly he caught him sleeping.
It's as good as you're going to see 2 drivers race against each other. Watching Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton battle it out wheel to wheel is the most exciting, because they do give each other enough space to race. So they very rarely really have incidents like Lewis and Max do, but it was scream out loud exciting to watch. I mean, it looked like millimeters a couple times that their wheels were as close as they were. So that was absolutely the highlight and the best racing of the entire race, honestly. So that little stint. But I would say for the worst, most embarrassing result, Matt touched on it very briefly earlier. Esteban not lining up properly on the grid for the launch. So he has a 5-second penalty for that. So he gets damaged somewhere along the line. I don't know who he runs into, but he comes in fairly early to change out his nose and to serve his penalty. But the mechanic gets his hands on the car like milliseconds before he's allowed to, as they're supposed to serve a full 5-second penalty, and the team can't touch the car until 5 seconds. And I guess they waited 4.8 or 4.9 seconds, and the mechanic put his hands on the car. They change the nose. They send Esteban out. They realize he didn't serve the penalty, so he has he's got to serve the penalty. And in that process, he gets a drive-through penalty. So it's like
he's
if you
fed
play any of the video games or the F1 video games, they just send out penalties randomly.
Penalty,
and Esteban
which gave
got
him
like
an additional
15
penalty.
seconds worth of penalties and a drive-through. It was hysterical to watch, but I felt really bad for him.
All because of the fact that he just didn't line up properly. Like everything was predicated off of that. He doesn't line up properly, so he has a penalty. Then he doesn't serve the penalty
Like
correctly.
Pierre
He didn't
Gasly.
serve his third penalty because of that penalty. He speeds through, and then apparently he admits that he speeds all the time because of the radio. He was like, I've been doing that for 7 years or whatever. And it was a blunder of a race week, and you thought it was going to be terrible for Alpine because of where Gasly qualified. Gasly qualified dead last. But he got points out of it, and Gasly essentially saved their weekend, which good for him. Our resident Pierre Gasly fan is not here, but it was a good first weekend for Pierre, or a good first Sunday. Let's put it that way. Not a full weekend, but a good first Sunday for Pierre. So good for him for saving Alpine's, first race.
Happy Pierre did well, right? Like obviously, I think a lot of people were projecting that he would potentially get a podium. Like Will Buxton and a few people thought that he would have a chance. So to qualify 20th and to finish in the points was pretty spectacular. And again, it's such a great showing from where he has been at AlphaTauri for so many years to be in a car that looks like it can really compete. I'm sure he is pretty fired up about that. But honestly, the winner for me, for Alpine for the week, was not Pierre Gasly. It was the pink livery. I don't know why they don't keep that livery year-round. It makes no sense to me. That livery is beautiful.
You brought up AlphaTauri.
Alpine not
up
looking
there with Colin Williams.
like they're going to be the
Stan,
number 4 constructor this season.
In the week, kind of when the race was going, that their testing was like they were essentially the worst constructor, and so people were kind of assuming that. And they actually did okay on Sunday. Nick and Yuki, jacked Yuki now. Actually jacked Yuki. Just shredded, ripped. Somebody get that man a P test or something, but just a fantastic.
The guy went from hating to work out, right?
I think they were just a
jacked
surprise
now.
up there.
Good
Everybody
for
kind
Yuki.
of was on the Aston hype train. Williams was kind of known to do well on the better side of power tracks last year. Alpha maybe, from a good standpoint, maybe a surprise for how they finished on Sunday. So good for both of those drivers.
Yeah, I mean, they finished 11 and 14. So, yeah, obviously a lot of room for improvement, but I think where they look like they were going to qualify based on pure speed, yeah, an overall pretty decent weekend for that team. But there are definitely some glaring issues at some of the lower teams. But I actually thought that
they looked like
they would put it on Williams.
I think we kind of know who the first four constructors are
compared to the Towers.
And I don't want to say they can get up to 5, but 5 or 6, especially on, once we get to tracks at Aero is going to be very important. But they didn't look, we all kind of predicted them 9th, 10th, mostly I think 10th. They didn't look like they were the 10th constructor out there. They looked very competent.
Oh, yeah. It's exciting to see where they're going to, we talked earlier, like having Logan on the team, an American guy gets some excitement for us. But if we can have a competitive Williams car with an American driver in it, that would be outstanding. But yeah, I was genuinely surprised at overall the Williams speed. And again, same thing we talked earlier. I was the most concerned about McLaren. It is all hands on deck. Something has to happen immediately. Again, hopefully changes are coming soon, but to have Oscar, DNF, and Lando have to come in every few laps
after Ferrari's blunders in most weekends,
they're going to be flirting with 8th or 9th in the constructors at this point. So it's going to be really like they got to figure something. They got to turn the ship around.
After Ferrari's blunders, you would have thought that they, in every other race weekend, they would have probably been, if you want to go, winners and losers, right? Even though they did score points with Sainz, they just had so many issues. And McLaren just was like, we're going to just blow you out of the water in this standpoint. Like they've got to be embarrassed. It was embarrassing to watch. They've got to be embarrassed within, in that paddock, just for how the entire weekend. The car's just not good, even if it was reliable, and it's not even reliable to even give you a chance at being good.
No, they're dead last ranked in the constructors. They're tied 0 points with Tauri and Haas. So, the fact
would
that
have had to have early based on Lando having
Alfa Romeo looks way faster. I thought they were going to as well. But the fact that Alfa Romeo and Williams are both ahead of McLaren at this point, this early, I'm very concerned for them. But yeah, Alfa Romeo, they look surprisingly fast. I couldn't believe how well they
where Lando even had
qualifying and in race pace. It was pretty
DRS on Botas.
I honestly predicted that they would be tanking this season. He couldn't even get close to the slowest car on the track to pass. They looked far from.
It was Alpha looked decent. They looked pretty good. Yeah, there was a point in there where I'm pretty sure it was Lando had that DRS and he couldn't touch him.
Trying to think of anything else major in the race that happened that we've missed out on. We have not really talked about. There's really not much to talk about. Max gaining pretty much a full second a lap every lap the entire race until the engineer tells him to tone it down, slow it down, get on the delta, and there's no race behind you. You're literally in a league of your own. So I don't know at what point we just concede and tell Red Bull that Max can just probably have the championship. But if they are even remotely close
the last
dominant as they look in Bahrain, this will not be. Well, it'll be a great season for Austin to watch, but it won't be a very entertaining season for everybody else to watch.
Last time we went from first week on and held the lead in the Drivers' Championship. I think we can pretty easily say that Max will end that streak.
Yeah, well, again, we're week 1 in, but if his car it could be the most dominant, it could be more dominant than last season. And I know we talk about that, Checo is he's filling a seat, right?
And
he's in the fastest car on
Checo
the grid,
is pushing,
and he's still 10,
and
15
Max
seconds down. It's incredible. Max really is.
Max is eating an OCS, a Burger King OCS over here, driving while he's racing in an F1 car. He's eating an original chicken sandwich, just cruising. He has no care in the world out there outside of yelling back and saying, "I'm not toning it down," essentially. I mean, he's hate him, love him, whatever. He is an unbelievable driver in an unbelievable car. And, yes, it's just, and I don't even, I'm stuttering because I don't even know how to even phrase just of what he does on a racetrack. I mean, there's nobody out there.
No, he's definitely winning everything he won last year. He could literally clean sweep the season. I had originally thought that maybe Mercedes would make a comeback this season. I was wrong. Couldn't be more wrong. Red Bull's going to run. I mean,
Mercedes finished worse in Bahrain this year than they did last year. I mean, they are behind of even where they were. Now, they don't have to fix the porpoising issue, but they got a whole lot of other issues that they've got to figure out. But Max is...
Well, they weren't gifted a double Red Bull DNF, right? Like last year, they were gifted a double Red Bull DNF, so it pushed them forward a little bit. But, I've been a little bit quiet when you guys have been talking about Red Bull, of course, right? Because I don't want to play bias or favoritism. Something I saw that was really interesting. If you look at the last 20 races, so dating back through Imola of last year, Max has won 15, which is 75% of all of those races, which Lewis Hamilton through the entire turbo hybrid era where Mercedes was completely dominating had never done. And I know that Lewis maybe had a little bit more competitive teammates, right? Because he lost the championship to Rosberg. Bottas had 21 wins or something. Like Bottas had a decent amount of wins, but it's crazy. And Cole, you had alluded to it earlier, that the whole tire management. So again, this was fun, right? Because this was the first race that we all collectively had watched together. So we hopped in our recording booth. We didn't hit record, but we just all kind of watched it. We were all on our computers watching the race together. And, I have always kind of had my routine of throwing an earbud in of Max's, cam and radio, and, listen to him and GP's banter back and forth. And it was pretty much starting lap 5, it was tire management. And then starting lap 30 or so, Max, slow down, your delta's too fast, there's no race. And he's like, well, I can go faster. He's like, it doesn't matter, there's no race behind you. So I know that there's always management happening, right? And I said it, I think last year, talking about Mercedes, where Mercedes came out into the 2014 season so much faster that after Australia, they intentionally turned the engine down because they were that good. And they didn't want the regulations to be changed to handicap them because they were so good. I wouldn't be past thinking that Red Bull intentionally pulls back a little bit and keeps some performance in hand as they keep developing, to make sure that the floor is not changed again, or the ride height isn't changed again, or something that is benefiting their car more than others isn't banned or modified or whatever. Because again, that car, it's so funny that you hear Max kind of frustratingly venting about how it's not stable right through practice and qualifying, and it's not set up for one lap pace. I'm sorry, it's not set up for one lap pace, and you still got pole by 0.3 over any other constructor, and then you come into race pace and you're legitimately a second a lap faster, probably. It's unbelievable on how set up that constructor is right now. And again, Jay, to your point, I know that Checo might win a race or two here or there because luck happens, right? And no one's immune other than Lewis Hamilton most of the time to bad luck. But it'll be an interesting season. I love the race portion of it, and I love the competitive side of it. No one wants to see a lopsided F1 race. No one wants to see a lopsided Super Bowl, right? Like the Super Bowl this year was way more dynamic because it was a lot of back and forth. Like, I hope that Mercedes starts figuring things out, but not so much. I hope that Ferrari fixes their just issues that they continually had. And it's really promising seeing that Alonso might be able to challenge for race wins this year.
Yeah, it was interesting. You were just talking about how well that constructor is set up, right? One, they lost a lot of their engineers and whatever. I say a lot, but a good many over to Aston, and they had the least amount of win total in time, not just because of where they finished, but because of the cap cost issue. And they still made the largest, maybe outside of Aston, but made the second largest gain of any constructor, what it seems like. And you kept mentioning it during the race, and I know the constructors in a league of their own, but Haas going from hard, soft before Red Bull got got to the hards on a soft, hard. It's incredible how good that car is, and not taking away from Max, because Max could probably win in a damn Pinewood Derby car that you used to race in Boy Scouts or whatever. But that car, it is just a perfect mashup of a phenomenal car with an all-world race driver.
Y'all will have to do a little
dominance
stat for me.
can be fun.
Has Max ever had a teammate
what has happened.
beat him on a season? And then I know the answer. Obviously, Lewis has been beat. Nico's beaten him. George has beaten him. And I think Jensen beat him, but I'm not positive. But on a head-to-head versus your teammate, I'm curious if Max, because he's had Carlos Sainz as a teammate, Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, and he's not, as far as I know, he's not lost to any teammates across a season since being in Formula One. But it's definitely not going to start this season because Checo there's no chance he's catching Max. I mean, the car is obviously suited for Max. It's the drivability and the pointiness of the nose is exactly how Max likes it. But just on pure speed and pure talent, I don't think anybody can beat Max up and down.
Yeah, I mean, you put him in the same.
It would be really nice to see, and I'm sure we will at some point sooner than later. Is when the time comes for Checo to move along, and whoever they put in that next seat, if they had a potential of a Charles or a Lando or someone who we know is fast, it would be really fun to watch Max head to head with a teammate who already has the speed, because we didn't really know for sure how Alex was going to do or how Pierre was going to do. And obviously Checo's fast, but he's not challenging Max week in and week out.
And going back to your answer, I don't think there's
I've got an answer for you. Yeah. So in 15, he was teamed up with Sainz, I think, right at Toro Rosso. He beat Sainz 51 points to 18 points. In 16, he had shifted over to the Red Bull 1 team in race 5 in Spain and won that race, but he lost to Ricardo 256 to 204. So he lost there. But he did outright lose to Ricardo in 17, 200 points to 168. Pierre. And then in 18, wasn't that the year that he raced against?
So Daniel beat him.
Yeah, Pierre. Yeah, I mean, Pierre had
that's a
never
good stat.
podiumed and Max won.
Yeah,
It was
and
259 or
back
249 to
Aston Martin. I know we've talked
36.
about it a couple different times, but one, I really hate it for Sebastian Vettel. Retired at the wrong time. Should have waited another season. But it does look like Fernando Alonso made the right move at the right time for the right price. It's because they look light years ahead of Alpine. Light years.
Do you think in the end and after the full season is over, do you think they're in the top three constructors?
So I have a couple different answers.
Think they beat
I feel like
the
the answer
Ferrari
is
or Mercedes?
if you take Lance out of the equation, the answer is yes. All day, 100% yes. If you give me Seb and Fernando, I think that they could maybe get second in the constructors. But with Fernando and Lance, I don't think that's realistic. I mean, I think fourth is very possible, but I would not. I don't know if third is going to cut it with the broken wrists.
I think here's another way to answer it, and I think this is kind of hitting what you had said.
Yes.
I think Alonso in the drivers' championship will beat one of the members of the top.
Fernando
three teams.
Absolutely outscores
But I think the constructors
either Carlos,
they will probably
George, or Lewis,
not
or
outright
Charles.
beat
He will outscore
one
of them. Absolutely.
I think he's easily. I don't say easily, but I think he's more than likely outscoring Carlos. That would be out of those. I don't know how much I trust with Ferrari didn't get better last year. Mercedes did, but Mercedes got better, and I don't know if they're any better than where they left off at this point. You could say no since they won in Brazil. I mean, Lance with 2 broken wrists finished 6th. It's still Lance, and he's going to have his Lance, fuck ups, and he's probably going to DNF in 4 races. I think they're an easy 4th, and I think they're knocking on the door.
I think if Lance stops knocking on the floor of Fernando, I think they have a much better chance
scaring those
getting
teams,
to there. But obviously, if your teammates are causing incidents with each other, right? That's the biggest no-no in the sport of all time. You cannot hit your teammate. It's but again, let's Lance. So what do you expect?
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys hear or did you listen to the post race press conference with the 3 podium guys? So one, there's a great joke, and Matt, you had said that some of the Red Bull team had gone to Aston Martin. So of course there was a little jab in there that was talking a quote from Sergio saying that we're all Red Bull drivers here because the Aston, again, no fault to their own, it's a copycat league, is very Red Bull, how it was very
Pink Mercedes and green Red Bull.
Yeah. So, but there's a question, and I'm just going to read this just to make sure I get the quote right. But there's a question from Aaron Deckers, one of the people in the press conference, and said, last year Aston Martin ended up in 7th in the Constructors' Championship. Obviously, with the new rules, is this ultimate proof that now Aston Martin is fighting for podiums now that the rules are working since last year? And Alonso said, I don't think so. No, you need to have the vision and the ambition of Lawrence Stroll, our leader and our management, because the opportunities are there for everybody, but it seems like we are the only team willing to do whatever it takes to win. And I'm proud to be part of this organization. And Max followed up with that saying, yes, Alonso's absolutely right. I think you've mentioned it all before, but I think it doesn't matter if it was a previous generation or this one. If you have the right people in charge and they really want to win, they will hire the right people, and anything is possible. Like Alonso is saying absolutely what you want a new driver who just got a podium to do. And that is back your team boss and say that we are willing to do anything. And I say that with the asterisk saying we are willing to copy a car. But again, there's nothing wrong with that because everyone will eventually do it. But I think Aston did it right in the offseason because they took whatever
Fernando
was
also
working
said
from anyone
right before the
else and they
season
applied
started
it to
that he thought
something
Lance
in
Stroll
a
could be a
formula
world
that
champion.
worked really well for them.
So take that for what it's worth. I don't know how much the fearless leadership of Lawrence Stroll was holding a gun behind his head when he said it, but I think that, yes, obviously Fernando has been groomed and knows how to play the game. And, he even says in Drive to Survive, he's the bad guy. That's just the role he wants to play, but filling the shoes nicely for sure. Fernando looks good in green, looks real fast in green. So, yeah, I hate that it's Lawrence on his team with him, but just how it is.
And what he said is it's right across all sports. He didn't say you talk about things that differentiate yourself, whether it's in F1 or if it's in the NBA or if it is in the Premier League and soccer, NFL, whatever sport it is. The competence in your leadership, and not just competence, but the willingness to do whatever it takes to win, whether within or within or outside of the rules. Like just watching, if you want to watch Drive to Survive, and that's about all the most we get for these like owners of the teams. But Lawrence Stroll comes off as somebody that's like, one, no nonsense, and two, like, we will do whatever it takes. I'm not here to lose. And you think within sports that these owners and whatever would all act like that, but some of them don't. A lot of them don't. A lot of them, it's a financial thing for them. But to have a guy like that to put in everything that he can to get you ready, and I know there's a cost cap and everything, but I wouldn't doubt that Lawrence Stroll has exceeded almost every other team that he possibly can with what he can do outside of that cost cap. I guarantee you he has. And I think that's what Fernando's saying. And as much as we joke about the Strolls and the Stroloviches and we give like Lance shit, like if you commit yourself as an owner and show them and your drivers or your players or whoever it is, your willingness to win, it makes their lives a lot easier. And Aston went and did it. Like they've done it more than anybody else, it seems. And Lawrence Stroll has told people he's not here to lose, and he's not going to win this year, but he won the weekend, from that kind of standpoint.
So I think looking forward for the rest of the season, does a team outside of the top three win a race this year?
Is it raining in Hungary?
Yes.
Like that's about that's it, right? Like
I'm going to say yes only because when you say the top three, right now that means Red Bull.
I don't think so.
Ferrari, Aston. So that still leaves Mercedes to potentially win a race. Or if you're looking at it from the other perspective, I think Aston could potentially win a race. But I would say of the top four teams, no, I don't see another team out of Aston, Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari winning a race this season. No. Yeah.
I think it's cool though that we have that fourth team now. Like, right? Like, I had said it when we were talking
100%.
maybe in the summer break last year that like, I don't see, Lewis, getting a pole or whatever because he would need four other cars to fail. And I was wrong. I think, George got his pole and whatever else. But now it's interesting that for another car to win, you need 8 cars to fail, or at least 7. We'll call it 7. It'll be an exciting season for sure.
It's a bummer that the 4 aren't competing for the top spot. The fact that we have 3 that can legitimately potentially compete for second, I just don't think there's enough races. Like, how many are there? There's 22.
22 more, 23 total, because China was canceled.
China was canceled, so there's 23. You're saying Max is, in the last 20, Max has won 75%. Like, if that stays, right, which seems like it could.
Red Bull should win 75%. We'll see if it's Max, yeah.
You're looking at 6 to 7 races maybe that you would have to pull one out. And that's not many. Like, there's going to have to be like a major like clusterfuck in a race for somebody to pull ahead. There's just the numbers don't add up in my head that makes me think that like McLaren doesn't look like they can win a race. Alpine, right? Like I don't think we can get there. I don't think any of them can get there.
Yeah, I think I'm most intrigued to see, as we wind down kind of like that, the development throughout the season. Like, it'll be really fun to look back at this podcast and say that Red Bull is so far ahead, knowing that they had the least amount of time to correct any issues along the way. If anything, if anything changes from now until November.
So with that, with looking in and predicting, we kind of did our predictions through our constructors pods. Has your mind changed on anybody for better? After one race, it's only been one race, but has your mind changed on any driver?
Aston, I'm in on the hype train. It's real.
After week 1.
While I'm still a McLaren fan at heart, yeah, real fucking problems. We got to do something. So yeah, Aston surprised me. Everyone talked about it leading up. They said that they were going to make big.
Yeah, I think I had forecasted one of the midfielders to come up and make that leap. I think I picked it wrong. I picked Alpine, right? I knew that it was probably going to happen for someone. I just picked the wrong one. Like, because they were both right in that middle and they had the opportunity. And, the thought was like they might leapfrog McLaren and start being able to bridge that gap. But yeah, very pleasantly surprised for the performance. And again, super excited to see kind of the ebb and flows of what happens. They kept alluding to it during the broadcast that or through the conversations, post race and everything else in the interviews, that the next 3 tracks, right? So you had Bahrain, which is like the most abrasive track on the calendar. You've got Jeddah, which is like one of the least abrasive tracks on the calendar. Very high speed corners, very fast. And then you've got Australia, which is just kind of off on its own and very unique. Coming out of these first 3 races, we should know how well-rounded each of these cars are to really tackle the rest of the 20 races leading up the rest of the year.
Yeah, I definitely had Aston wrong. I think I projected them like 7th because that's just where they've been. And again, Cole, I'm with you. McLaren they brought it back after race 1 last week. I just don't know if they can. But yeah, we've got Jeddah in 2 weeks, a fast but terrifying track. But we're not off next week. The drivers are off next week. We'll bring a pod to you same time, same place, same pod channels. So we appreciate y'all listening, follows, listens on all social medias. We appreciate your time, and we'll be back next week. Looking forward to bringing y'all some more F1 fun and stats. Here we go.